Before Captain Bronson can pull his phase pistol from the holster at his side, the Makos behind him have shoved him out of the way and pushed forward and have their phaser rifles pointed at the handful of crew of the ECA Independence. The standoff is intense. We hear the crew of the Independence shouting at the Makos, at Major Lambert, as Captain Bronson tries to push back in front to get in between the two groups. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Star Trek Adventures Captain's Log, part 2 of our 8th mission, which I have called Caravan. The Challenger has found the Earth Cargo Authority vessel Independence, which has crashed after an apparent warp drive malfunction in a star system with a very, shall we say, territorial space station blocking the one entrance and exit, safe entrance and exit, through the planet's atmosphere. Where the former inhabitants of said space station are to be found, whether there are any inhabitants currently living on the planet, that is unknown at the time. However, for Captain Bronson and the handful of crew with him, that is the least of their worries. So in this tense moment, I don't think it's actually fitting to have a supplemental captain's log. So we're just going to leave it for the time being as we enter Act 2 in media res. So we're going to go ahead and start right off. Captain Bronson needs to make a persuasion check of sorts. In this case, it's going to be presence security because we're in this very tense situation. Focus of diplomacy does come into play. The only thing that'll do is get us a momentum if we roll below the value. We already have a momentum, so that's not something we need to worry about. Target number is 15, and we're going to say that difficulty 1, straight up, should be an easy task. Yeah, 4 and a 13. So Captain Bronson gestures to both the crew of the Independence and the Makos. Nobody's listening to him, so he turns his back on the crew of the Independence, faces the Makos, and says, "Weapons away, these people are not our enemy." And at that, as he turns back to face the Independence crew, we see their faces, they kind of dartedly, nervously look back and forth between each other before beginning to lower their weapons. And as the brown dwarf, the light from the brown dwarf comes out from behind a cloud, the light kind of shines into the docking hatch on the Independence, and for the first time, the crew members are able to see, first off, that the majority of these people are human, all except for Dr. Kieran. And not only that, but they're wearing Starfleet uniforms. And while the ECA has certainly had issues with Starfleet in the past, as we've seen in Enterprise, Travis's family certainly didn't care for the fact that he, in their eyes, abandoned their family and their ship for a life in Starfleet. Those issues are settling down as years go on. Starfleet has only been around for 15 years, so still a lot of growing pains. But in this case, they are very glad to see a familiar face, as it were. Real quick, before we get into the specifics of this, I've just had a thought, and we probably need to see how badly their ship has been damaged. In particular, I want to see casualties for their crew. So, because this will impact how things progress. One of the thoughts I had was that they were going to end up having to do something with the Independence. But if there's a lot of crew left, they're going to have to get the Independence out of here as well, because there's no way they can shuttle back and forth as many times as they'd need to. So, let's go ahead and roll. We've got a fatalities and survivors chart. So let's see how many fatalities first. We'll do that with the red die, and the survivors with the blue die. Oh dear. Well, we rolled a 19 on the fatalities, which means loss of the entire department. In this case, I'm going to assume that everybody except the 4 people whose names I generated are dead. Which is a little bit maudlin, but that's the way of things. And fortunately, the blue die determined rolled a 16. All survivors injured, a mix of major and minor, which actually fits with how I've already described them. So, the Independence is damaged. Certainly their engines are damaged, and their crew is pretty much dead. They have spent... These ships don't have a huge crew. There's only been, like, 25 or 30 people, I would argue, on this ship. Especially as they were testing a new engine. So it's not like they lost 100 people, 200 people, or something like that. So Captain Bronson turns to the 3 survivors in front of him and says, who's in charge? And the man who's kind of in the lead looks like he's got maybe a broken leg. It seems to be splinted. He kind of steps forward and says, I'm First Officer Emmett Allen. The captain, she didn't make it. Well, she's probably not going to make it. And he looks around at the others and then shrugs and continues. The captain, she's in sickbay. We put her in a coma. Hopefully she'll... I don't know. And at this point, Dr. Kieran steps forward and says, if one of you will take me to your medbay, I will endeavor to do what I can for her, see if we can't get her stable enough to take her back to our ship. And we would see the other woman. There's a woman in this group. She kind of gestures for Dr. Kieran to follow her and leads him deeper into the Independence. Bronson continues, well, how many other survivors are there? And the 2 men remaining look at each other and shake their heads. Bronson nods, understanding the significance of that gesture. Well, then if I might offer a suggestion, the space station in orbit is going to be a challenge for us to get out of here. Our transporters are non-operational through the atmosphere. Did you manage to get any data on the weapons as you were coming in? The other man, the one who hasn't spoken yet, turns to Bronson and says, no, we were focused on other things. Bronson again nods. What's the status of the Independence? Are your engines space-worthy? And again, the same man says, well, we can get her off the ground, but the hull has taken so many breaches we wouldn't be able to maintain any sort of atmosphere. Bronson kind of looks thoughtful for a moment and says, I think that might just work. How good's the automatic pilot on this thing? And we see a gleam in Bronson's eye as he says this. And I think that, let's see, do any of the other crew have good insight? Any of the others that we brought along, at least? Ensign Monroe has a pretty good insight of 10. Yeah. So Ensign Monroe looks to the captain and says, Sir, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? And he says, yes, we get the Independence spaceworthy and use her as cover to fly us and the survivors of the Independence back to the Challenger. And Ensign Monroe just looks absolutely, shocked isn't necessarily the right word, but odd that her captain would think of such a, frankly, badass idea to get them out of there. It astounds her. The one who's been doing most of the speaking so far, he says, well, sir, very much a tone of derision to his words. Let me show you our engine room and then let you determine whether or not your plan is actually going to work. And he leads the rest of the group. So Bronson, Ensign Monroe, Major Lambert, and the two Makos deeper into the ship. We get to see that the ship is a major mess. There are sections of the hull that are so badly damaged that we're seeing sky beyond it. But we're led down into main engineering. There's a temporary work light on. Looks like main power is offline. And it looks like they haven't, as of yet, been able to get things functional again. So, at this point, we're going to skip by a lot of the conversation. I think it's time for Captain Bronson to make a test. It's obvious that he's going to need to figure out a way to get the Independence crew to work along with his crew to get the ship spaceworthy again. So, let's call this a present engineering test. And I don't think, again, that we've got a focus at play. Inspiration isn't exactly what I'm going for. Cooperation would be. Teamwork would be. But I don't think inspiration is. So presence engineering, target number 14, difficulty 1. Let's go. Well, we got a success. But we also rolled a 20. It's not a session of Captain's Log with me if I don't roll a 20. So we will generate a threat there. And because I hate having threat, we're just going to spend our previous momentum and burn that threat away. But we did get our success. So he's able to, talk a good talk and do the standard Starfleet captain speech. We may come from different backgrounds and we may have different training, but we're all humans and we've all been through hell and high water to get where we are. If we can't work together here, then we have no business out here. Gesturing, of course, to the wider openness of space beyond them. And everybody starts to get to work trying to enact his plan. Everybody kind of does their own thing. Captain Bronson, I think he's going to have to make an engineering test right here. So let's go ahead and do... He goes at it through a more reasoning attitude. He's not got the fine motor control for fine-natured detail work. So he's going to try and puzzle out some of the more tricky parts of engineering. He is experienced with engines to a certain extent. Doesn't have a focus in it, but is experienced with them enough that he's hoping he can get the impulse engines back online. Reason engineering, that's a 13. We're going to use our red dice since this is an engineering task. A 3 and a 6, we get that momentum back. How lucky we are. All right, so after, we need to figure out roughly how long this has taken. So, let's see. By this point, I haven't looked at this in a minute. I have not thought about the fact that I have a complication that I rolled in mission creation. I got to remember that for Act 3 because I think it's going to be important. Although it kind of came into play. Although the dice handled it and it's not the complication itself. But I think we can say, horrific discovery. A disturbing revelation shakes the crew, forcing them to reevaluate circumstances. The entire crew of the Independence being dead, except for 4 members. That could be useful here. So we'll go with that as being our complication taken care of. So... they've managed to get main power back online. They've spent, I'm going to roll a d20 for the number of hours. They've spent 20 hours getting the ship back and running. So by the time all is said and done with main power active, everybody is exhausted. At this point, we hear... And the captain unzips his sleeve pocket and pulls out his communicator and says, "This is Bronson." And we hear a very badly garbled transmission coming through the other side. "Captain, this is Wilson. Sir, we think... Station... dangerous." "Say again, Commander, you're breaking up." And then we'd get a less garbled version coming through a few moments later. Captain, we think the station in orbit is going to cause problems. We've been unable to find a way to jam its targeting. We've looked for alternatives. I think it's going to be very dangerous for you to come out that way. And Captain Bronson would reply and give her the rundown of their plan. And it's at this point that, first off, I'm realizing that my pacing is a little off. This feels like we should have had a few more tasks, and it feels like we're getting into Act 3. So what I think we're going to do, as Captain Bronson explains the plan, we're going to skip tasks 9 and 10 in Act 2. For the primary reason that, first off, we've had major success with the dice rolls, but second off, we want the conclusion to have a lot of meat to it. So, Captain Bronson explains to Commander Wilson through the garbled transmission, very short 2-sentence explanation, tells her, Commander, have the Challenger in location. We're going to be flying, let's see, spinward. Spinward would, I think, be the right term. So using the planet's spin as the explanation for which way they're going to be coming out of the atmospheric pocket. So he explains that they're going to come out spinward and have the Independence's autopilot set to follow a course out, and they're going to hide in its shadow. And if all goes well, they'll be able to meet up with the Challenger just out of weapons range and get the hell out of here. So with that note, I think we're going to leave this act a little bit early. Just 3 tasks here. Actually, no, we have one more task that we can do. And this is a great time to bring in a supporting character, because there's not really anything else that the captain needs to do. There is something else, however, that the doctor needs to do for the captain, the other captain. So let's see if Dr. Kieran can stabilize Captain Rosa Carr long enough for her to get back to the Challenger. So we've got this would be a reason medicine test. We're looking at a target number 14 for Dr. Kieran. And if we need to, we do still have our momentum to spend. I'm sure that Kieran would spend it if necessary. So let's go. Target number 14. Well, that is certainly a success. We rolled a 1 and a 5. So don't even need to spend our momentum. With that, we see that Dr. Kieran, with his medical supplies, is able to stabilize the Independence's captain long enough to, with some of the Mako's help, get her back to the shuttlecraft, get her strapped in to a much safer position. And as Act 2 ends, we see everybody file on to Shuttlepod 1. It's definitely crowded in there. It's a good thing they only brought a couple of Makos with them. But Captain Bronson takes the co-pilot position, and Ensign Monroe takes the helm. And with that, we're going to go ahead and leave Act 2 off here. We can mark that task. We're skipping Task 10, and in the next session, we will conclude Caravan. Until then, make sure you leave a comment with what you think you might have done differently, what you think might happen in the next session. And go ahead and give a subscribe to the channel if you enjoy these sorts of episodes and want to see more in the future. Until next time, live long and prosper.